Montana Territory, 1881. The wind howled through the cottonwoods along the Bitterroot River when Loretta Hale raised her rifle at the creak of a bootstep behind her. Her fingers were raw, her dress threadbare, and the two small children behind her curled together in a pile of old quilts stirred at the sound of tension snapping through the air. "I would not shoot unless you mean it," came a calm voice, low and even. She did not lower the rifle. From the trees stepped a man in worn canvas trousers and a dusted trail coat, the brim of his hat low over dark eyes. A horse stood behind him, reins loose, the animal steady. He raised both hands slow, palms out. I saw the smoke. "You have no roof, no firewood." "Your children are shivering." "They are not mine," she said quickly. "Their mama left them here 2 nights ago. I ain't seen her since." He nodded once, eyes never leaving hers. "I'm not here to take anything, miss, just passing through, but you look like you could use help." She studied him. He was tall, lean, and had the look of someone who had seen too much and spoken too little. The kind of man who did not flinch when a woman pointed steel at him. "Who are you?" she asked. "Judson Vale, cattleman, heading south to Bannack for wintering." Loretta's arms ached from holding the rifle. She slowly lowered it, though she did not step aside. "You got food," he nodded. "Beans, salt pork, coffee." The smallest of the children, a boy, no older than 4, let out a weak cough. The girl, maybe 6, stirred beside him, blinking up at the man. "They ain't eaten since yesterday," Loretta said. "I gave them the last of the bread." Judson walked forward slowly, reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a wrapped bundle. "Let me start a fire." She hesitated, then stepped aside. Her boots scraped on the hard earth as she knelt beside the children, checking their foreheads while Judson worked. He moved like someone who had built 100 fires before. No wasted motion. No fuss. When the flames caught, he opened the bundle and started heating the salt pork in a pan. The scent made Loretta's stomach twist. "You eat too," he said, glancing at her. She hesitated. "You look like you haven't since yesterday either." Loretta sat slowly, arms wrapped around her knees. Her dark hair was tied back in a frayed ribbon, and the shadows under her eyes ran deep. "I do not know you," she said, voice quiet. "No, ma'am, but I know what hunger looks like, and I know when someone's been left behind." She looked at him then. Really looked. His coat had a tear at the shoulder, one boot was patched. There was something about the way he spoke that made her chest ache, like he was not asking for trust, just offering it. The children ate first. Then Loretta. Judson watched the trees as they ate, one hand resting near the rifle he had set beside him. That night, he slept sitting up near the fire with his coat pulled over his lap, his hat low. Loretta did not sleep much. She sat awake with the children, listening to the wind and wondering how long she could stretch the kindness of a stranger. By sunrise, the boy Zeke was curled against Judson's side, fast asleep. The girl Zadie was playing with a stick, drawing swirls in the dirt. Judson handed Loretta a tin cup of hot coffee. "Where's their mother?" he asked. "Gone," she said. "Came to my door 2 nights back, begging me to take them. Said she would bring more food, never came back." "You got family?" "Dead," she said simply. "My brother died in Wyoming last winter. I came north looking for work, ended up in a church house scrubbing floors. Been in this shack since spring." Judson nodded, quiet for a long moment, then he stood. "I will stay through the storm," he said. "Then move on." Loretta blinked. "You do not have to, I know." She watched him walk off toward the tree line with an axe slung over his shoulder. By the time the snow started falling that evening, he had stacked enough wood to last a week. He patched the holes in the roof with canvas from his pack. He mended the broken hinge on the door and fixed the crack in the stove pipe. Loretta watched him warily the whole time. She had known men who showed up with smiles and left bruises. Her father had been one, her first employer another. She did not know what a gentle man looked like. But Judson never raised his voice, never stared too long, never asked for anything. That night she handed him a bowl of beans. "You should sleep inside, it is cold." He looked at her, then nodded once. "All right." He slept near the fire with one of the quilts. Zadie curled up beside Loretta and Zeke lay under Judson's coat. Days passed. The snow stayed. Judson never said much, but he showed up with food. He hunted rabbits. He taught Zadie how to check a snare line. He lifted Zeke onto his shoulders when the snow was too deep for the boy's little legs. Loretta watched him. Something in her chest softened. She did not know what to call it. One morning she stepped outside and found him chopping wood. Snow clung to his hat. He paused when he saw her. "You slept?" he asked. "A little. You do not talk much," she said. He nodded. "Neither do you." She stepped closer. "Why are you still here, Judson?" He looked at her. "Because you needed someone." She did not know what to say to that. No man had ever stayed, not for her, not for anyone who did not offer something in return. He set the axe down. "You are not alone anymore, Loretta." Her breath caught, not from fear, but from something she did not recognize, something warm. Later that night, while the children slept, she sat beside him near the fire. Her shoulder brushed his. He did not move away. "I do not know what a gentle man looks like," she said suddenly. Judson turned to her. She looked into his eyes. "But when you called me darling earlier, I felt it." His throat moved as he swallowed. "I meant it," he said. She reached for his hand. He took it. Warm, solid, real, and for the first time in years she felt safe. The river thawed in slow pulses. Ice cracked in the mornings and drifted downstream by dusk, pulling winter away with it. Judson had stayed longer than he said he would, and Loretta hadn't asked why. She knew better than to question something kind before it vanished. That morning, she was kneeling by the garden plot, breaking up the cold, hardened soil with a stick when she heard his boots behind her. "You ever worked a mule team?" he asked. She looked up, shielding her eyes from the pale sun. "No, but I had a milk cow once, fed her by hand." "That count?" He crouched beside her, settling into a squat like he'd done it 1,000 times. "Reckon it does." "I got a team waiting in Bannack, but the man meant to help me drive him up to Helena took sick." He paused, fingers sifting through the dirt. "I could use someone steady." Loretta leaned back on her heels. "You asking me to go with you? I'm saying you'd have a place on the wagon if you wanted it." "You and the children." She studied his face. There was no pity in it, no urgency, just a quiet steadiness. "An offer, not a rescue. I ain't ever been farther than Virginia City," she said. He nodded. "That's farther than most." Zadie's voice carried from where she sat stringing beads on thread. "Will there be trees?" Judson smiled, just a flicker. "Plenty, pines tall as church steeples." Zeke clapped his hands once, then went back to poking at a beetle with a twig. Loretta stood slowly, brushing her skirts. "You'll be wanting help with the wagon." "I will. I ain't afraid of work." "I know." She looked toward the mountains, where the snow still clung to the ridges like ghosts not ready to let go. "We'd need to leave soon if we aim to beat the spring floods." 3 days, he said. "I'll have the harnesses ready," she nodded. "All right." That night, while the children slept, she sat on the cabin threshold watching the moon rise over the trees. Judson came back from checking the snares, his shoulders dusted with pine needles. He didn't speak, just sat beside her and handed her a strip of dried venison. "Did you mean what you said?" she asked after a time. "About what?" "About there being a place for us." He turned his head. "I don't say things I don't mean." She looked down at her hands. "I never had someone mean something for more than a day or two." He rested his forearms on his knees. "Then maybe it's time you did." The wind rustled through the trees. Somewhere out in the dark, an owl called twice. "You lost someone?" she asked. He was quiet a long time. "A brother. Younger than me, drowned in the Judith River. I was meant to help him cross. Rope snapped. I never found his body." She looked at him then. "You carry it like it's still happening." "I reckon I always will." She didn't reach out. Just sat beside him, letting the silence stretch like cloth warming over a fire. "You ever been in love?" she asked, voice low. "Once," he said. "Years back, she married someone else. I wasn't ready." Loretta pulled her shawl tighter. "I wouldn't know what to do with love, even if it stood at my door." He looked at her, really looked. "You're doing just fine so far." She blinked, caught off guard. "I'm not teasing," he added. "You listen, you care for them children like they're yours. You don't flinch when things get hard." "That's more than most." She didn't answer. Just watched the moonlight ripple across the snowmelt pooled near the trees. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. All right, we'll come with you, good. But I won't owe you, she said. His gaze didn't waver. You won't. She stood, brushing off her skirt. Don't leave without us. I wouldn't. He stayed on the threshold after she went inside, watching the stars. Come morning, Loretta began packing what little they had. She laid out the children's shoes by the hearth and stitched a patch on Zeke's coat. Judson brought in a bundle of oats and a pair of gloves too big for her hands but warm. She didn't ask where he got them. He didn't say. On the second night, she found him oiling the leather harness by lamplight. She stood in the doorway, arms folded. I'll walk some of the way, give the horses less weight. You won't need to. I'm not fragile. I never said you were. She stepped closer. I just don't want to be a burden. He set the oil tin down. You're not. She hesitated, then reached up and touched his chest just above the collarbone. I don't know what I'm doing. Neither do I, he said softly, but I want to try. He didn't move. Just looked at her like she was something worth waiting on. All right then, he said. And in that quiet, lamplit space with the leather still warm from his hands and the scent of oil hanging in the air, Loretta felt something settle inside her. Something not like fear, not like hunger, not like the hard-boned ache of being alone too long. It felt like beginning. They left the cabin before the frost lifted, wagon creaking beneath them as the horses drew slow breath into the chill. Loretta sat beside Judson on the driver's bench, Zadie curled under a quilt between them while Zeke dozed in the back among sacks of feed and a wooden crate of potatoes. The road was little more than a trail, rutted and slick from snowmelt, winding east along the Bitterroot foothills. The first 2 days passed in quiet rhythm. Wheel spokes ticking over stones, bridles jingling, Zadie humming tunelessly under her breath as she watched the trees pass. Loretta kept her hands busy, mending a ripped hem or keeping the firebox lit when they camped. She didn't ask where Judson had found the copper kettle or the extra blanket. He didn't offer, but everything they needed seemed to appear just before it was missed. On the third evening, they camped near a bend in the creek, where willows leaned low and the riverbank held firm. Judson was tending the horses when Loretta stepped down from the wagon with a tin bowl of lentils. They don't speak of you in Bannack, she said, handing him his portion. He took it with a nod. I don't stay in one place long enough to be spoken of. You lived there once, long time ago. My uncle ran a smithy near Grasshopper Creek. She sat on a flat stone beside the fire. You still see him. He passed 5 years back. Left me a stretch of land south of Helena. That's where I'm headed. Zadie curled up near the fire, her eyes heavy. Zeke was already asleep, thumb tucked against his cheek. Loretta watched the smoke drift upward. You plan to stay on that land? I do. You got help waiting? No one, he said. Just 40 acres needing fence. She stirred the coals with a branch, lips thinning. That's a steep thing to face alone. I wasn't planning to be alone. His voice was soft, but it held weight. She looked up, eyes catching his across the flame. I didn't plan for any of this, she said. I didn't either. Silence stretched between them, not empty, but steady. She'd come to understand that about him. He didn't fill space with words he didn't need. I was married once, she said. Judson didn't move. It didn't last a year. He drank. Got mean when things went wrong. He set the tin aside. You don't owe me your story. I know, I'm not telling it for you. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded them in her lap. I left in autumn. Found work in a boarding house in Missoula. Stayed quiet, did what I had to. But I never stopped looking over my shoulder. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You still looking? She shook her head. Not for him, just for what comes next. He nodded once. I'd like to be part of that. She didn't answer. Just reached out and tugged the edge of his coat sleeve, fingers brushing rough wool. It was the first time she touched him unprompted. He turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers, slow and careful. The next morning brought a wet wind and a sky the color of pewter. They pressed eastward, stopping only to water the horses and feed the children. They passed 2 mining camps and a burned-out cabin that made Zadie go quiet for hours. Judson didn't speak unless necessary, his attention on the road, the slope of the land, the clouds banking low over the hills like warning. By the fifth day, mud sucked at the wagon wheels. Loretta took the lines while Judson walked ahead, clearing fallen limbs with a hatchet. Zeke bounced on the seat beside her, laughing each time the wagon jolted. That night, when the fire was low and the children tucked in tight, she joined Judson near the riverbank where he'd gone to wash up. He stood with his boots off, trousers rolled to the knee, feet in the freezing current. "You always do that?" she asked. "Feels like starting over." She stepped beside him, letting the hem of her dress touch the water. "What did you think your life would be?" He watched the current. "Quiet, honest, I never wanted much." "Just something that held." She reached for his hand again and he gave it without question. "I want the children to have a place," she said. "Something rooted. They will. You think it's foolish." "Me believing in that now? I think it's brave." She looked at him, the water licking at their ankles, and the last of her hesitation slipped behind her like a stone carried away in the dark. "I want to build that with you." He turned to her, eyes steady. "Then let's build it." And when he leaned in, it wasn't rushed or uncertain. It was the kind of kiss that said, "I see you and I will not leave." She rested her forehead against his chest after, her breath slow and even. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The stars came out while the river ran cold around their feet, and the world, for the first time in a long time, felt like something they could hold. They reached the edge of Helena Valley beneath a sky streaked with pale gold, the mountains behind them softened by distance, their wagon trailing a long shadow across the open plain. The land Judson called his own lay several miles south, past the cottonwood stands and fenced pastures that had begun to green at the edges. Loretta stood when he slowed the horses, her hand on the wooden seat rail as she scanned the horizon. "It's flat," she said quietly. "Mostly," Judson replied. "But there's a creek that runs through the north end, windbreak of pine on the far side, soil's not deep but it holds." Zadie leaned forward from the wagon bed, her hair tangled from the road. "Will we see deer if we're quiet?" Judson said. Zeke stirred beside her, lifting his head from the sack of oats he'd been using as a pillow. "Is this where we live now?" Judson didn't answer right away. He stepped down and walked to the edge of the field, boots pressing into the thaw-soft ground. The grass was patchy and brown, but it would green before long. He waited until Loretta climbed down beside him. Her hands were red from the cold, her shawl pulled tight. "All this is yours?" "Ours," he said. She didn't look at him right away. Her eyes stayed on the land, moving past the fence posts he'd set last season, the rough outline of where a home might rise. "You got lumber?" she asked. "In town," he said. "I've credit at the mill, enough for a frame and roof. Then we'll need nails, hinges, window glass. I've got a list," she nodded. "We'll need to dig a root cellar before the first frost." He studied her face, the way she squared her shoulders like she was already measuring the work. "You sure this is what you want?" he asked. "I wouldn't be here if I wasn't," she said. That night they slept in the wagon, parked near the old stone chimney that remained from a prospector's cabin long collapsed. Judson had cleared the brush weeks earlier, knowing he'd return. He built a fire in the hearth, and Loretta spread the quilts over the wagon bed while the children curled up together, too tired to speak. She stepped down once they were asleep, walking to where he stood by the flames. "You ever built a house?" she asked. "Helped raise 3. "Never one of my own." She eased down onto a fallen log nearby. "I reckon we'll make mistakes, maybe, but we'll learn." He glanced at her. "You sound sure." Loretta picked up a stick, poking at the coals. "I've survived worse than a crooked wall or a roof that leaks." He stepped closer. "You're not doing this alone." She looked up at him, eyes steady. "I know that now." The silence that followed wasn't stiff. It held something deeper, a readiness, a quiet understanding between two people who'd chosen a future that would need their hands, their time, their care. He sat beside her, knees brushing. The fire lit the edge of his jaw, the line of his throat. She reached for his hand, fitting her fingers between his without needing to ask. "I want to plant corn," she said. "All right. And carrots." "If the soil allows." We'll test it come morning." She let her head rest against his shoulder. "You ever think you'd have this?" "No," he said, "but I never stopped hoping I might." The next day they walked the land together. Judson showed her where the creek curved near a ring of chokecherry bushes, where the fence would need mending, where the sun stayed longest in the afternoons. Loretta knelt and pressed her palm to the earth. "It's damp," she murmured. "Good start." Judson unloaded the tools from the wagon saw, hammer, auger. Loretta fetched the ledger from beneath the seat where she'd kept it wrapped in cloth. She opened it on her lap and began drawing lines, marking walls and doorways with a stub of charcoal. Zadie watched from the wagon bed, chewing on a bit of jerky. "Can my bed be near the window?" "If we can get one that opens," Loretta said. Zeke sat cross-legged beside a rock, talking to a beetle in the grass. Judson glanced toward him, then back at Loretta. "We'll need to keep him clear of the tools." "I'll teach him to carry water," she said. "He likes feeling useful." They worked until dusk. No one asked what came next because they already knew. The days would be long, the house would rise slowly. The weather would turn and test them. But they would meet it together. That night, Judson laid another log on the fire and handed Loretta a cup of warm milk, heated with a pinch of salt the way his mother used to make it when mornings came cold and early. She took it, her fingers grazing his. "You're not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" She looked at him, her face soft in the firelight. "Hardness, demands, a man who needed more than he gave." He didn't reply, just watched her in the quiet. "But you never once made me feel less," she said. "Not once." He reached up, brushed a bit of ash from her cheek with the back of his knuckle. "That's because you're not." She rested her hand over his. "You called me darling once, back when I still had my rifle pointed at you. I remember. Do you still mean it?" His voice was low. "Every time I look at you." She leaned in, her breath a whisper between them. "Then say it again." He tilted his forehead against hers. "Darling, I'm yours." She closed the space between them, and his arms came around her slow, careful, like he knew she'd never been held without being hurt. And when she kissed him, it wasn't out of fear or need or loneliness, but because she'd chosen him and he had chosen her. The fire crackled behind them. The land stretched wide and waiting. And in that quiet warmth, Loretta knew not just in her mind, but in her bones that this was home. By late spring, the frame of the house stood proud against the sky, its beams cured from the lumberyard in Helena and hauled up the slope in careful loads. Judson drove the team on delivery days, and Loretta stayed behind with the children, teaching Zadie to boil water over the stove ring and showing Zeke how to hold a hammer without hurting his fingers. They laid the floorboards together, Loretta on her knees with a chisel, Judson fitting the tongue into the groove, sweat running down his temples. The rhythm of their work had become its own kind of language, no wasted motion, no idle words. When they paused, it was to drink from the same cup or lean against the frame and let the wind cool their skin. The day the walls were raised, Zadie stood barefoot in the doorway space, arms stretched wide. "It smells like tree bark," she said. "It should," Loretta replied, brushing sawdust from her apron. "These walls were trees not long ago." Judson stepped down from the ladder, his right arm still stiff from the strain. "She's solid," he said. "Took the level clean." Loretta crossed the room, resting a hand on the beam he'd trued. "It's not just wood now." He looked at her, eyes catching hers. "No, it's ours." That evening, once the children were asleep under canvas in the wagon, she joined him by the unfinished hearth. He was oiling the hinges for the front door, sitting cross-legged in the last of the light. "You ever think you'd raise a house with a woman and 2 children you hadn't known a season ago?" she asked. "I didn't think I'd raise one at all," he said, "but I kept a hammer in my saddle roll, just in case." She sat beside him, pulling her shawl tighter as the air cooled. "I've never made anything that lasted. You are now." She touched the edge of the hearthstone. "When it's finished, I want to hang a quilt on the wall. Color's not much, but it'll make it feel warmer. We'll make it warm." She smiled, not with her mouth, but with her whole face. "You always sound sure." "I'm not always, but with you I don't have to pretend." They sat in silence, the wind combing gently through the grass, the house standing behind them like a promise. By midsummer, the roof was shingled and the windows glazed. Zadie painted wildflowers on the shutters with a horsehair brush, and Zeke planted seeds along the southern edge of the house, checking them each morning for signs of sprout. Loretta hung linens to dry under the cottonwoods, her arms bare to the sun, her laugh fuller now, less guarded. Judson traded a spare saddle for a hand-forged stove in Helena and brought it home tied in burlap. Together, they bolted it into place and tested it with biscuits that browned unevenly but tasted like home. One morning, as she swept out the last of the wood shavings from the parlor, Judson came in holding a small wooden box in both hands. "I carved this for you," he said, setting it on the table. She opened the lid. Inside lay a silver ring, plain but smooth, resting against a folded scrap of linen. "I don't have a preacher," he said, "but I've got time and patience and a heart that's yours if you'll have it." She didn't speak for a long while. Her thumb ran over the edge of the ring, and when she looked up, her eyes were wet but steady. "I never dreamed of a wedding," she said. "But I dreamed of being chosen." "You are," he said. She held out her hand, and he slid the ring onto her finger without ceremony, without fanfare, just certainty. That evening they stood in the doorway of the house, watching the sun slip behind the far ridge. Zadie and Zeke were catching fireflies in jars, their laughter rising like music. "You want more children?" she asked quietly. "I want whatever life brings with you." She leaned against him, her head tucked beneath his chin. "Then we'll take what comes." Autumn came with golden leaves and the scent of apples ripening wild along the creek. They harvested carrots from the plot behind the house, and Loretta taught Zadie to braid onions for drying. Zeke carried a small basket each morning, asking Judson endless questions about how to tell soil from clay. The house settled into its place like it had always been meant to stand there. The hearth burned steady through the first frost, and the pantry brimmed with jars of preserves and sacks of flour. Loretta kept her ledger by the window, tracking their stores in neat, looping script. One cold morning in November, Judson returned from checking fence lines to find her in the kitchen, a hand resting low on her belly. She didn't look up right away. "I thought I was just tired." He walked to her, slow, careful. "You're sure?" She nodded once, eyes bright. "It'll come in summer." He wrapped both arms around her, holding her close in the warmth of the kitchen. "We'll be ready." The snow that year was deep, but their walls held. The children grew strong, their cheeks flushed with cold and laughter. Loretta kept sewing at night, her fingers steady, her eyes soft when they met his across the lamplight. When the baby came in July, a girl with dark hair and clear eyes, they named her Ruth after Loretta's mother. Judson built a cradle from pine and carved her name into the rail. That night he sat beside the bed, holding her tiny hand in his calloused fingers while Loretta rested, her face turned toward him in the candle glow. "You gave me a life," he whispered. She reached for him, her voice hoarse but full. "You gave me a home." And so they lived through seasons of sun and storm, through quiet mornings and long nights, through work and rest and all the small, steady moments that stitched a life together. They built not just a house, but something lasting. A place where love was not spoken in grand words but lived in shared bread, in mended fences, in the hush of a child's breath against a mother's chest. And there, on that piece of Montana earth, they stayed, together, always.